The signal was not meant to be found. It wasn't a call for help, not exactly. It was a tombstone screaming into the void, a legacy etched into radiation, pulsing once every 100 years like the breath of a dying god. 10,000 years it waited, and for 10,000 years the galaxy ignored it, until humans came. The signal wasn't elegant, it was brute force. Gamma spikes, subspace bursts, code packets that shattered decoding protocols. The automated filters of elder races dismissed it as background noise, flickering remnants of a long-dead civilization not worth revisiting. But humanity was still new to the stars, still curious, still naive. And they listened. A relay on the edge of the Perseus fringe caught the anomaly. No known frequency, no repeatable structure, but the signature bore signs of artificial origin and urgency. Unlike the great powers who pass judgment in microseconds, Earth sent it to the Exploration Authority. And Earth did what no one else had done in 10 millennia. They answered. The Vigilant Spark, a long-range scout ship retrofitted for deep anomalies, launched within 21 hours. 5 crew, limited AI, enough supplies for 90 days. The mission brief was simple: find the source, make contact. Record return, it was madness. The coordinates pointed toward an irradiated sector called the Chiral Expanse, lightless, forgotten, believed sterilized by ancient wars. No known colonies, no traffic. No reason to go there except the whisper of something that should not be whispering at all. The journey took 16 days. They passed wreckage, silent hulks drifting like bones through the dark. No heat signatures, no survivors. Only corpses frozen in the vacuum, armor rusted by time and silence. The Vigilant Spark logged 39 derelicts in the final stretch, none human, all of them ancient, all destroyed by something that didn't leave a return address. Then the ship reached the source. A dead world tidally locked, orbiting a dwarf star barely above collapse. No atmosphere, surface cracked like dried blood. At the equator, buried beneath obsidian ridges, the signal pulsed, stronger, clearer. No longer a cry, a command. The crew debated extraction. Protocol advised caution. But the captain, a former engineer with more scars than ranks, made the call. They descended. The entrance was sealed beneath a vault of alloy no human database could identify. It responded to proximity. Not touch, not sound. It opened like a sigh. The team descended into blackness. The interior was preserved, not ruins. Not wreckage, but design symmetry, geometry, power. Lights activated as they moved, not from motion but from awareness. The place was awake, not alive but watching, measuring. They reached the heart of the structure, a chamber of towering pillars and circular platforms, suspended in gravitational null. In the center, inside a containment sphere of flickering energy, was the origin of the signal. A throne, a corpse, and a machine. The corpse wore robes made of molecular filaments still regenerating themselves. The skin, gray, stretched thin over bones, had not decayed. The face, elongated and cruel, stared upward in frozen agony. It hadn't died of age. It had died mid-broadcast. The machine wrapped around it like a cradle, part biological, part psychic conduit, part weapon. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was waiting. As the crew approached, their minds buzzed, not with sound, but pressure, thoughts, alien, layered, ancient. The AI on board shut itself off voluntarily. One of the crew collapsed, blood streaming from her nose. The captain made the second call. They activated the machine. The corpse blinked. Not metaphorically. Its eyes, covered in glass-like lids, opened, and it screamed. No sound came, but the lights shattered. The chamber convulsed. Gravity failed. The air became thick, impossible. The crew collapsed. And then silence. The crew awoke moments later. Time was meaningless. The corpse was gone. In its place on the floor, a figure sat, alive, weak, diminished, but aware. It looked at them with eyes blacker than any spectrum could define. It spoke in thoughts, not words. And the thoughts came as a storm. It was the last of the Ilaran High Sovereigns, a race older than stars, long believed extinct. architects of technologies that terrified their own creators. They once ruled half the galaxy not by war but by awe. Civilizations surrendered to them willingly. Their empire collapsed in a single century, and no one remembered why. The being, too old to be called a man, did not speak its name. It had discarded it after watching its children turn to ash. What it told the crew was this: it had sent the signal to warn, not to save. The enemy that destroyed them was not a species, not a weapon. It was something deeper, older than even they. Something that made itself forgotten. Something that whispered ideas until empires collapsed under the weight of their own logic. They had no name for it, only a symbol, a mirror with no reflection. The humans asked why it responded now after all this time. The answer was not comforting, because it heard something familiar in them. The Old One asked where the others were, the Arikvarn, the Veshin, the Saravel, races who had once stood beside the Alaran as brothers. The crew explained. They still existed, but they had ignored the signal. The Old One laughed and the chamber wept with dust. They chose silence, it said, over memory, and in silence the enemy waits. The humans asked if he was a threat. He said he wasn't anything anymore. They asked what he needed. He said, "I need time and fools who still believe in fire." They gave him both. The ship's AI rebooted itself, damaged but stable. It refused to process any sensory data from the alien, called it a cognitive hazard. The captain accepted it. The decision was made. They would bring the survivor back to Earth. It wasn't for science, or politics, or diplomacy. It was because no one else had come. As they lifted off the planet, the signal died. But something else replaced it. Something that had been listening, now listening closer. In the darkness between stars, something moved. The last of the Alaran closed his eyes and whispered in thought, "You've invited it. Now you must teach it fear." The vigilant spark turned away from the dead world with a passenger the galaxy had buried and forgotten. The crew said nothing as they entered deep jump range. The silence wasn't respect. It was instinct. Something had shifted in the universe the moment they took the Alaran aboard. Even the air felt different. His name was never spoken. The crew called him the Sovereign, not out of reverence but necessity. What few readings the ship managed to gather on him were useless. Biological scans failed. Energy readings bent into negative integers. Even light avoided him. When the ship's onboard AI tried to define his presence, it refused. Not failed, refused. The Sovereign wasn't part of any known taxonomy. It was like trying to measure a black hole with a thermometer. He didn't move much. He sat near the gravity core, eyes closed, breathing once every few minutes. But when he did open his eyes, the temperature dropped. One of the crew swore they heard whispers that weren't in any language. The medic, hardened from 3 frontier tour, started sleeping with a sidearm. No one questioned it. 3 days into the return trip, the first dream hit. The pilot saw his dead brother in the mess hall, not a hallucination. A perfect rendering, speech patterns, smells, voice. But the brother whispered things he never knew. Secrets buried so deep, the pilot vomited after waking. The Sovereign watched him for 3 minutes afterwards, silent. Day 5, the engineer locked herself in the maintenance bay and refused to speak. Not out of fear, out of shame. She claimed the ship spoke to her, told her she'd fail. That Earth would burn, that the crew were already dead, they just hadn't noticed yet. When they dragged her out, her arms were covered in strange symbols, not carved, not inked. Bruised into the skin by something she couldn't describe, the captain confronted the Sovereign. "What's happening to my people?" The Alaran opened his eyes. "They are being noticed." He explained, not kindly, that the enemy, the thing that destroyed his empire, didn't use weapons. It used attention, curiosity. It whispered into minds and built cities of delusion. It turned empathy into infection. The more one tried to understand it, the more it understood you. It wasn't watching the crew because they found the signal. It was watching because they brought him back. It had forgotten him. Now it remembered. The captain asked why it hadn't followed him sooner. The Sovereign smiled, barely. "Because it was sure I had nothing left." It was wrong. They tried to isolate the ship systems. Firewalls, redundant backups, manual controls, nothing mattered. The Whisper didn't hack, it infected. The navigator started charting routes to stars that didn't exist. One crewman erased his own memories, overwriting them with poetry he'd never learned. On day 8, the cook opened an airlock and walked out, smiling. The AI sealed itself off completely. Final log: this isn't data. It's ritual. The Sovereign began carving, not with tools but with his mind. The ship's walls changed subtly, then obviously. Symbols etched themselves into the floor, not markings but rules, counter-curses, memory anchors. Psychic tripwires. The crew protested, then stopped, because the hallucinations faded, the voices dulled. The Sovereign was shielding them not out of kindness but strategy. They are drawn to minds that search for meaning, he said. You humans are the hungriest species I've ever seen. That makes you vulnerable and useful. The captain asked what it was. The Sovereign didn't answer with a name. He showed them a memory. It wasn't a vision. It was shared consciousness, raw, painful, and immediate. They saw a world made of glass, shattering as people forgot how to breathe. They saw fleets consume each other in silence, convinced their comrades were impostors. They saw a sun rewritten into a shape that made no sense, until the star itself tore apart in shame. They saw a library older than the galaxy scream as the knowledge inside realized it should not exist. And they saw the Alaran fall, not in battle, but in surrender. Because the Whisperer never threatened, it convinced them they deserved extinction. The Sovereign, last of his kind, had sealed himself beneath a tomb not to escape, but to hide the map. A memory of resistance, the coordinates of defiance. He was the last torchbearer, buried so the dark would forget the light. And now, because of humans, the dark remembered. On day 11, the first external contact was made. An unknown ship appeared on intercept course. No heat signature, no drive trails, just appeared. The spark scanners failed. The Sovereign ordered weapons ready. The captain reminded him the spark wasn't a warship. I know, said the Sovereign, but war doesn't need ships, it needs anchors. The enemy didn't hail them, didn't threaten. Instead, it broadcast a message in pure emotion: shame, despair, affection, surrender. One of the crew, youngest, barely 20, began weeping and asked to be allowed aboard the enemy vessel. She forgives us, he whispered. She understands. We can rest now. The captain sedated him. The Sovereign walked past and placed 2 fingers on the boy's forehead. The weeping stopped. The boy died quietly without pain. He was already gone, the Sovereign said. You just hadn't noticed yet. They jumped again. And again. The enemy followed. Not in ships, but in memory. They started finding rewritten logs, messages they never sent, conversations they never had. Entire conversations with Earth Command, flawless, authenticated, time-stamped, except no signal had been sent. The AI re-emerged for 4 seconds. It said, "Stop listening." Then it self-deleted. The Sovereign taught the crew how to forget on purpose, which emotions to sever, which questions to never ask. He told them which words to avoid. He gave them silence as a weapon. By day 17, the spark was barely functional. Not from damage, but weight. The psychic pressure was like atmosphere thickening around a planet. Earth was 3 jumps away. The crew was 2 members down. The rest barely spoke. The Sovereign stood in the central chamber and began assembling something. It looked like nothing. But the moment it was completed, the enemy blinked. They felt it. Not in scanners, in blood. The Whisper stopped. It wasn't gone. It was afraid. The captain watched the Sovereign, trembling. What did you build? He looked at her with eyes that had seen galaxies die. A question it cannot answer. The next jump would bring them home. The Sovereign warned. Earth must not welcome him. They must prepare. Because now the galaxy remembered him. And so did the thing that had tried to erase him. It wouldn't let the humans go unanswered. But the Sovereign saw something in the crew, in the madness they'd endured. Not resilience. Not strength, but disobedience. The others obeyed the Whisperer, he said. You defy your own gods, that makes you dangerous. The final jump aligned. The spark, cracked and bleeding, aimed itself toward Earth. The Sovereign sat in silence. He didn't ask for mercy. He asked for a name. The captain gave him hers. He whispered it once, then said, "Then let your kind be remembered for what comes next." They jumped. The galaxy blinked. And in the ruins of forgotten empires, something ancient snarled. They arrived in Earth's orbit as a shadow of the ship that had left. The vigilant spark broadcast no ID. It sent no hail. It barely even moved. Earth's defense grid reacted instantly. 5 orbital patrols closed in, weapons hot. But before anyone could fire, the spark transmitted a signal, not through the comms array but directly into the minds of every sentient on the station. It was a simple message. Do not speak. Do not ask. Do not welcome. Then the Sovereign stepped onto Earth's soil. No parade, no greeting, no press, only silence. The crew was taken into immediate quarantine and no one questioned the urgency. Every scan failed. Every test contradicted itself. Medics noted signs of extreme trauma. The surviving members spoke little. Their eyes darted in strange rhythms, tracking shapes that weren't there. When questioned, they all gave the same answer. We brought something back, but he's not the danger. We are. The Sovereign was escorted, not with force but reverence laced with terror, into a subterranean facility miles beneath Greenland's northern crust. No cameras. No digital systems. Nothing networked. Everything analog. A vault designed not for storage but containment, he approved. The political world spiraled. Rumors of a pre-extinction alien broke containment within hours. The Galactic Compact demanded access. Earth refused, not diplomatically, firmly. For the first time in its post-entry history, humanity ignored a direct command from the wider galactic community. The response was immediate: sanctions, threats, repositioned fleets. Earth did not flinch, because they had seen the dark, and they knew it was watching. The Sovereign spoke to Earth's leaders in a room with no lights. No notes were taken. The observers remembered little, but what they did recall would later be archived under the codename Protocol Shatterpoint. The message was this: it has awoken. And then he told them why. The Whisperer, as the humans began to call it, did not live in space or time or any dimension measurable. It lived in perception. It seeded civilizations with knowledge too elegant to resist. It gave ideas. It whispered truths. Then it waited for minds to unravel under the weight of them. Empires didn't fall because of weapons. They fell because they asked the wrong questions, because they listened. The Alaran did not lose a war. They lost a conversation. And now, because of human curiosity, the Whisperer was speaking again. It was already inside the galactic net. It was already rewriting facts. Entire races began recalling histories they'd never written. Celestial coordinates began changing. Some species stopped receiving light from stars that still existed. Worse, some started hearing voices in their dreams claiming to be themselves. Earth's response was immediate. The Sol net was severed. No AI permitted uplink. Communication was reduced to pre-digital, analog-only protocols. A human-only oversight board was created, tasked with decoding the Sovereign's memory scripts safely. The Alaran designed a new discipline for them: counterthought warfare. The first principle was brutal: do not trust what makes sense. Then came the test. A council ship from the Galactic Compact arrived without invitation. It carried envoys from 6 major races. All of them demanded to see the Sovereign. Earth refused. The envoys insisted. One of them accused Earth of hoarding a galactic threat. The envoys never left. They turned their weapons on each other in the shuttle hangar. Only one word was heard in the recordings before the massacre: forgiven. The Sovereign did not react, but he did warn the humans. It has noticed your species now, and it is afraid of you. Not because of strength, because humans couldn't stop asking why. That made them the perfect hosts or the perfect virus. The Sovereign explained what had to happen next. He gave them coordinates, old places forgotten by maps, written only in the gravitational scars left on subspace. There were 6, remnants of the old war, places where the Alaran tried to bury knowledge, seal wounds, anchor reality. Humanity would have to visit them all. The first team was assembled, not soldiers, not diplomats, archivists, linguists, and one blind child. The sovereign insisted. "She can't see lies," he said. "She'll be your compass." The mission was codenamed Echo Harvest. The first site was beneath a neutron cluster where no ships ever returned. A vault, older than memory, buried inside a planet that shouldn't exist. The humans found it. They descended. What they found wasn't a weapon. It was a story. An idea so pure it couldn't be described. The second the team read the glyphs, one of them walked into the void. Another claimed to see the death of the universe in reverse. The child pointed to the wall and whispered, "It's asking if we're alone." The team sealed the vault, burned the records, took nothing. That was the lesson. The Whisperer wanted them to take, to understand, to share. The Sovereign praised them. "You defied the question, you survived." The second site was worse. It moved. By the time they reached it, 3 nearby systems had already gone dark. The surviving inhabitants weren't dead. They had forgotten how to be alive. Breathing, blinking, eating, gone. Not as a plague, as consent. They believed life was unnecessary. The humans couldn't save them. They could only record what was left. The child cried. She said they were proud of not needing pride. Another victory for the Whisperer, but the Sovereign gave the humans a tool, a frame, a way to see infection before it rooted, patterns in speech, doubts in certainty. He taught them how to doubt their doubt. Earth codified it as Phase 1 cognitive armor, a philosophical vaccine. Other species laughed at them, until their own history began changing. The Saravel homeworld ceased to exist, digitally. Records wiped, maps re-rendered. Their own young began claiming it was always that way. Only the elders remembered differently, and they were going mad. They begged Earth for help. Earth didn't respond with scientists or warriors. They sent poets. Because the Sovereign had said, "You will not win this war by proving you are right. You will win by reminding the universe it was once wrong, and survived anyway." The third site was in a black zone where laws of physics reversed every 4 hours. The team lost 2 members, but the Sovereign told them, "That was a fair trade. You learned which questions to leave unanswered." The Whisperer was growing louder now. Dreams across Earth began to echo with phrases never spoken. The phrase was always the same. "You've always known this wasn't real." Earth implemented blackout cycles, disinformation dampeners. Entire colonies voluntarily severed comms to stay cold. Then came the turning point. The Whisperer tried to impersonate the Sovereign. It used his voice, his shape. It broadcast to all major powers, declaring that Earth had lied, that humanity had resurrected an ancient tyrant and was preparing to enslave the stars. Many believed it, some sent fleets. None returned, not because Earth fought, but because something else met them. The Whisperer had revealed its face, and now the Sovereign knew where it hid. It wasn't in ships or mines, it was in memory, in the records. In truth itself, the Sovereign asked Earth to make a choice. Do you want to save the galaxy, or do you want to save yourselves? The answer was unanimous. Earth replied, "Why not both?" The Sovereign laughed for the first time in 12,000 years, and for the first time, the Whisperer flinched. The stars themselves had grown quiet. Entire systems no longer responded to hails, not because they had fallen, but because they no longer believed in communication. Words were vanity. Meaning was obsolete. The Whisperer had matured. It no longer whispered. It declared. But Earth still answered. The Sovereign stood atop the final archive, a memory tower buried in Mars's southern pole, hidden under 60 meters of ice and 30,000 years of irrelevance. It wasn't built by humans. It wasn't even built by Alarans. It was older. A seed left by a race that had no name because it had erased itself from every mind that ever lived. But the archive remained. It responded only to 2 things, a question and defiance. The Sovereign activated the final sequence. Earth's last resistance fleet took position around the Sol system. No orders, no speeches, just presence. They weren't guarding the system. They were challenging the void. The Whisperer responded, not with ships, but with clarity. Every human system experienced perfect understanding for exactly 1 minute. They knew everything, all answers, all purposes, all secrets, the meaning of life, the fate of the soul, the design of the universe. And then it was taken away. A trillion voices screamed at once. Some begged to forget, others demanded to die, but one, just one, simply said, "No." The voice came from a child on Europa, a girl born blind, the same child who had walked the archives and returned untouched. She stood alone on an empty ice plain, looked at nothing, and refused truth. That one word shattered the illusion. The Whisperer recoiled, because humanity didn't need answers, it needed the right to ask. The Sovereign watched the rupture unfold across subspace. Patterns unraveled, ghost systems collapsed. Illusions blinked out of existence. The infection had spread too far to stop, but now it had met resistance it didn't understand. Choice. Humans began pushing back, not with weapons, with contradictions. They created art that made no sense. They wrote books that refused to end. They programmed AIs to question their own protocols. They told jokes with no punchlines and laughed anyway. And slowly, the Whisperer realized it couldn't infect what didn't agree with itself in the first place. The Sovereign told Earth's leaders the final truth. You are not immune. You are unstable. But in that instability, you are incomplete. The Whisperer cannot complete what has no finish. That's why it failed to rewrite you. That's why it fears you. The galaxy turned. The compact fractured. Some species begged for protection. Others turned on each other. But Earth, fragile, young, stubborn Earth, offered no empire, no sanctuary, no lies. It offered a mirror. If you don't like what's in it, they said, change what's looking. The final act began in a forgotten system the Sovereign called the Mirror Core. The birthplace of the Whisperer, if such a thing could exist. It wasn't a place. It was a concept localized into location, barely tangible. The rules bent there. Thought could rewrite time. Memory could collapse stars. It was suicide to enter. So the humans went in, not with fleets, with a single ship. The last question, crewed by no AI, no hardened soldiers, just philosophers, children, a historian with stage 4 cancer, a musician with no hands, a convict with no regrets, and tea.